We got a huge Calgary Flames trade update. As on a recent podcast appearance, Darren Dreger said that Craig Conroy and the Calgary Flames are laser focused in on Dylan Cozens of the Buffalo Sabres. Now, this has big implications moving towards the trade deadline for a Calgary team that's been making a lot of moves and for the future seasons afterward. We have to dive into what Dreger said and the implications on the Flames cap situation and more going forward. All that plus more coming up on this episode of Hat Trick HQ. But guys, quick reminder before we get into the video, 90% of you are not subscribed. We just passed 11,000 subscribers. But if you want to stay up to date on all the latest news around the entire NHL, hit the subscribe button down below. It's completely free. Mark, let's get into this video, and I want to just talk first about the Calgary Flames situation right now. We'll get into what Dreger said a bit later. You'll want to hear that because this Cozens stuff it's picking up pretty fast. But right now, the Calgary Flames, they're fresh off making a big trade with the Philadelphia Flyers, sending out Kuzmenko and another prospect, Jacob Pelletier, in exchange for Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee. Now, Morgan Frost RFA after this year, and Farabee is currently slotted into play on that top line. They have a lot of good talent on the team right now, Mark, and that trade to me indicated the Flames are looking to be big-time buyers. What are you thinking about the way Craig Conroy is seemingly approaching this deadline, let alone what we'll be getting into a little bit later?
It was kind of surprising seeing them buy, but I do like it. They're in a head-to-head battle right now with the Vancouver Canucks, and with the Canucks kind of struggling, it does seem like the Flames do believe that they can hold on to the wildcard spot or advance even higher up in the standings. I mean, looking at the lineup, they have improved quite a bit. I love Frost. I think Morgan Frost was an awesome add to this team. You can look at the entire lineup. There's a lot of names on this that are quite underrated, in my opinion. Uyghur is a guy that's probably not talked about enough in the entire NHL. Rasmus Anderson, like I said, Morgan Frost, Kadri, Huberdeau. This is a good team, and Farabee as well. Looking at this, it is nice to see the Flames buy, and in my opinion, they have a young team. You can see from what they have on this current roster, people signed for quite some time. They have a window, and not in a window of, hey, they have to win a cup in the next 3 years, but they do have aging veterans on this roster that they need to work with. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I do kind of like what they've been doing over in Calgary.
Yeah, like the thing is, you hear things about the Flames. You're like, well, Kadri's contract is aging poorly. He's going to decline. He's not going to be worth $7 million. Huberdeau's contract is going to age very poorly. It kind of maybe already has. Sharon Govich has a big extension coming up, and he hasn't been performing very well this year. But then you look at the rest of the team. You have a couple of guys that are free agents like Rooney and Mantha, but then you have a lot of young guys as well, like Coronato, like Zary, and even a guy like Dustin Wolf in net. And overall, Calgary has an insane amount of cap space. So not only could they be big players at the trade deadline, they could be big players heading into free agency, and they have cap space at the exact right time as the cap is going to be going up in a couple of years. Their contracts right now are not going to age nearly as poorly as they once were, and they have some young guys. So I think making some moves makes a lot of sense. And Mark, I think that's just a good transition. We got to get into this Dylan Cozens stuff now. There's a lot to talk about because on a recent podcast appearance, Darren Dreger seemed to indicate that there is more stuff coming for the Calgary Flames, to say the least. We thought it might have been done with Frost and Farabee, but he said, if you're going after Dylan Cozens, what are you giving up? He said Kevyn Adams in Buffalo doesn't want futures attached to a trade that's going to send out Dylan Cozens. He said about 20 teams are interested in Cozens, and Calgary is on that list, of course. It seems like Calgary is fixated on Dylan Cozens. And then he says, who's going back the other way? Connor Zary? Now, we'll dive into maybe Zary in particular later, but Mark, looking at the way that the Flames are organized right now on their depth chart, does Dylan Cozens even make much sense to you? The dude's on a big extension, over $7 million per year for the next, I think, 7 years, 7 or 8 years. And yeah, there you go, $7.1 million. He's in year 2 of 7. His production doesn't really match it. We know the kind of player he can be. He can be a 30-goal, 68-point player. We project he could be an 82-point player, point per game guy, but right now, there's more evidence that he's closer to a second-line winger than he is a first-line center. So what are your thoughts on the Calgary Flames adding this guy to their roster? Do you think that could give Cozens the boost he maybe needs with the way Calgary's looking going forward?
I mean, the biggest thing, looking at Dylan Cozens, we see that he isn't having the most productive year. But the thing is, he's only 23 years old. He has a lot of room to continue to grow, almost 24 years old. But even still, yes, the biggest problem with this is the contract. 7.1 mil for a guy that hasn't really had his breakout yet is a little concerning for this team if they go out and get him. I mean, you're looking at the contracts. I have Huberdeau as one of the guys. You have Kadri that's signed to a big deal. But looking at the lineup, I do think Dylan Cozens would fit really nice on this team. It opens the window for a longer period of time. Getting Dylan Cozens in as that number 2 center or on the wing, depending on where you wanted to play him. You do have aging vets, Backlund's there, Coleman's there. One of these guys, maybe you attach. Backlund's not going anywhere, but maybe a guy like Coleman, maybe Sharon Govich if you want to switch things up. But looking at this roster, looking at how Cozens has played, it's a big risk coming from the Calgary side. But it's one of those things, and I always go back to this. When Buffalo trades a player, we've seen it with Jack Eichel. They traded him. They didn't want him. They thought he was done. Went to Vegas. He's the best player on the team. He won a Stanley Cup as the best player. Buffalo's a little cursed, and I'm sorry, Buffalo fans, if you're watching this, you know yourselves that it is a bit of a curse in Buffalo. I think both sides might be worried. I think Buffalo wants to move on and maybe not have to deal with the what ifs. But then you also have to deal with the what ifs on the Calgary side. And what if he turns into the next number 1 center like Jack Eichel? I don't know if you think that it's a good idea going out to trade for him. I mean, we'll talk about what it might cost, but do you think there is a possibility they go and get Dylan Cozens and he turns into the next Jack Eichel? I know Eichel was a little more established at the point of his career when he was moved, but it seems like it could be eerily similar.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, there's always been talk about the culture in Buffalo and this losing culture they seem to breed. I'm not going to dive into that. I think it is possible. I mean, I've seen what Dylan Cozens can be, but right now the sample, it doesn't have me convinced. I think in the right situation, this guy can flourish, right? I don't know who his best wingers would be in Calgary. Like, I don't know if he'd get a chance to play with a guy like Huberdeau. I mean, Coleman and Coronato are not bad, and they have some young guys too, like Zary that we'll dive into in a second. But like, that the what you said is a reason why I think Dylan Cozens will be really hard to move because Buffalo's going to want they want current assets, right? They want someone that's good now. And there's not a lot of guys on the Flames that fit that bill. Maybe Erasmus Anderson or maybe a certain forward that we'll dive into in a second. But like, Cozens is all about theoretical value and very little proven value, whereas Buffalo wants proven value back for him. So any team that's willing to give up proven value for this kind of what if scenario, they're not a team that's maybe looking to make this push. I don't know. It's a risk, right? You really want to be sure that you have Cozens. And so that's why the trades proposed, especially what Darren Dreger, he mentioned just briefly about Connor Zary. Zary's been great. I mean, look, 22 points in 40 games this year. 34 points in 63 last year. But this guy oozes talent. He's the same age as Dylan Cozens. And honestly, you could argue that he's just as good. Actually, we spoke to Mark Griffith, a Flames Digest, a diehard Flames fan. He wouldn't even touch Connor Zary for Dylan Cozens. Zary's such a complete player. Cozens is low-key a bust. I mean, hey, you know what? It's maybe a bit low-key. I think Cozens could turn into something, but he said what he said. And when you're looking at the Flames and who else they could give up, I said, what other current player do you think they could send out? He's like, maybe Coronato. He's the only one that comes close, but I think I'd rather have Coronato to Cozens. Mark, I don't know what you think about these ideas here that you probably want to keep Coronato or Zary for Cozens, but again, guys in your own homegrown system, guys that you've watched play, you're always going to want to go for those guys, let alone the fact that they're not making nearly as much money.
I mean, looking at this, the biggest thing is you have these guys signed for time. Zary is a guy that's going to be an RFA at the end of the year. But why move on from someone like Connor Zary? And it's going to cost more. I mean, we've seen Darren Dreger throw out that they want maybe Connor Zary back in the trade. But Connor Zary is maybe not at this very moment as productive as Cozens has been in his career, but there is a chance that he grows into this. Why move on from someone like Connor Zary, maybe an established forward, a draft pick, whatever it might cost, when you can take the risk to keep Zary, see if he develops into something better? This is one of the things, if you sign Zary to maybe a bridge deal, 3 years, at year 2, if he hasn't developed, yes, you lose a bit of value, but then maybe think about moving on from him. The last thing, and like we said with the Buffalo thing, moving Jack Eichel, the last thing you want to do is move a guy that's looking like he's about to break out, or someone that looks like he's already breaking out. Sorry, Buffalo, once I say the Eichel trade still blows my mind. But why move out Connor Zary for a guy that's in a similar situation while having to still attach assets when you know what you have? This is a team that's fighting for a wild card spot. Yes, you can add Cozens, which helps with immediate impact. Yes, you could come in and be that number 2 center or take the number 1 center role from Kadri as he ages. But I just don't like it from the sense of having to add more when you know what you have right now is working. You still have a young team that's going to grow into a contender. You can go out, you can pick up free agents, you can make this trade in the offseason. On my standpoint, I wouldn't do it unless you can get this deal done without touching your young guys, but that's not going to happen. I don't know. Would you do this if it was Connor Zary plus more?
I've always been, I don't know. I always feel like if you see a guy, like they're the same age, Cozens has better production and he has a better history of production. Connor Zary is a better overall, like all around player, whereas Cozens is a bit better offensively. So it's like, I mean, look, actually, the production's not even that different this year, to be honest. 26 points in 52 games. It's tough. Like, I can absolutely see it from a Flames fan perspective. Like, why risk it? Like, why risk it for a guy putting up very similar numbers? And Cozens is, you could argue he's playing with better line mates. So part of this season he hasn't been. So I don't know. I don't think I would if I'm Calgary. I don't know why they're fixated on Dylan Cozens. We'll have to see what they can move for him. I mean, it's possible that Buffalo accepts something for none of these young guys, but Buffalo wants pieces as well. They don't want futures. They want to start building their team still now. I mean, I guess they have enough young guys. They got guys like Dahlin. They got guys like Power. They got guys like Zach Benson and a few more. Even Paterka's doing well. Tage Thompson's not that old. So they want to start to compete soon. There's not a whole lot of guys that fit that bill on Calgary, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Would you trade Zary or would you trade Coronato? Would you trade anyone on the Flames roster for Dylan Cozens? Does it even make sense? We'd love to hear from you, but that'll do it for this episode of Hat Trick HQ. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. We have a lot more videos just like this coming very soon. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Mark Pye. We'll catch you in the next one.